Okay, so Shabbat Shalom to those who are here, those who are online, and those who are going to watch later. This week's Torah portion is Mishpatim, and it begins in Exodus chapter 21 and goes through chapter 24, verse 18. And so this portion tends to be a hard one, I guess, in some ways. Exodus 21, verse 1, and it'll go through chapter 24, verse 18. And so Mishpatim is translated as ordinances or judgments. And as we start going through, we look at these, and it seems to be a list of a whole bunch of rules. And they seem a little jumbled up, but as we'll go through, it's not. This parsha, this portion is the 18th portion of the year. And 18 in Hebrew is chai, or life. And so these rules are about our life. And, last week's portion, Yithro started with the revelation of the giving of the commands on Mount Sinai, and it continues into this week's portion. So it's just like when you talk about Mount Sinai, you're actually going to do two portions to cover it. And in last week's portion, I do want to go look at a few chapters and look at something here before we get into this week's, because it links with it. But back in last week's portion, Yithro, in chapter 19, I'm going to go to verse 2 and start reading there. Exodus 19, verse 2. We see that it says, after setting out from Rephidim and arriving at Mount Sinai, or the Sinai desert, they set up camp in the desert. There in front of the mountain, Israel set up camp. And Moshe went up to God, and Yah called to him from the mountain, here's what you are to say to the household of Yaakov, to tell the people of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will pay careful attention to what I say and keep my covenant, then you will be my own treasure from among the peoples. All the earth is mine, and you will be a kingdom of Kohanim for me, a nation set apart. These are the words you are to speak to the people of Israel. And Moshe came, summoned the leaders of the people, and presented them with these words that Yah had ordered him to say. And all of the people answered as one. Verse 8, look what they say. Everything Yah has said we will do. And Moshe reported these words of the people to Yah. Okay, so that was from last week's portion. We see that the people said they're going to obey and do the commands. Okay.
That's something I never could understand.
Okay, so what is it? Let's go to chapter 24 in this week's portion. And I'm going to go to 24, and I'm going to start in verse 1. So Exodus 19 is before, they hear all the commands. They're saying, yes, we're going to do them. Chapter 24, Exodus 24, verse 1. To Moshe, Yah said, come up to Yah, you, Aharon, Nadab, Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel. Prostrate yourselves at a distance, while Moshe alone approaches Yah. The others are not to approach, and the people are not to go up with him. And Moshe came and told the people everything Yah had said, including the rulings. And the people answered with one voice, we will obey every word Yah has spoken. And Moshe wrote down the words of Yah. And he rose again early in the morning, built an altar at the base of the mountain, and set up 12 stones to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, so in verse 3, we see again, they say, whatever, we're going to obey whatever Yah said. They say it again. Okay, keep reading. And chapter 24, okay, verse 5. He sent the young men of the people of Israel to offer burnt offerings and sacrifice peace offerings of oxen to Yah. And Moshe took half of the blood and put it in basins. The other half of the blood he splashed against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant, read it out loud so that the people could hear, and they responded, "Everything that Yah has spoken, we will do and obey." So wait a minute. Why are they repeatedly saying, "We will do and obey"? Because they already agreed to do it before they even knew what they were. Why did they have to say it again? And again, they say it 3 different times here, and it's repeated over and over again. Any thoughts? No?
I ain't getting into this one. It'll take me 10 minutes if I go into this one.
Okay.
That's what I was wanting to talk about before.
So this made me think about, the fact that it was repeated and they said it 3 different times. It made me think about the story in the Brit Hadashah with Peter. So I'm going to go over to John chapter 21. John chapter 21, and I'm going to go to verse 15. John 21:15. After breakfast, Yeshua said to Shimon Kepha, "Shimon bar Yochanan, do you love me more than these?" And he replied, "Yes, Lord, you know I'm your friend." And he said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Shimon bar Yochanan, do you love me?" And he replied, "Yes, you know I'm your friend." And he said, "Shepherd my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Shimon bar Yochanan, are you my friend?" And Shimon was hurt that he questioned him a third time, "Are you my friend?" And so he replied, "Lord, you know everything. You know I'm your friend." And Yeshua said to him, "Feed my sheep." If I read this in a different version, I'm going to read it just here in the net version. It says, "Then when they finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, the son of John, do you love me more than these do?' And he replied, 'Yes, Lord, you know I love you.' And Jesus said to him, 'Feed my lambs.' And then Jesus said to him a second time, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' And he replied, 'Yes, Lord, you know I love you.' Jesus told him, 'Shepherd my sheep.' And then Jesus said to him a third time, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' And Peter was distressed that Jesus asked him a third time, 'Do you love me?' And he said, 'Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you.' And Jesus replied, 'Feed my sheep.'" And so here again, we see this where we have this 3 times. And I know many teachers will focus on the Greek words for love. Well, we're talking about different love here, that Jesus is asking him one word in love and he's responding with the other. Jesus is asking him agape and he's responding philo or whatever. But when I think about this, and I was like, well, wait a minute. In Hebrew, the word for love is ahav. Okay. Ahava is love. And I don't think that this is a Greek translation thing because, I think, that Yeshua was speaking Hebrew. And so he's not using 3 different forms of the verb of the, Greek word. I think he's using the Hebrew word there. And then so why is Yeshua continuously repeating this question? I tend, like I said, I tend to believe that they're speaking Hebrew and that there's one word for love. So why would this repetition be happening? Oh, sorry, just broke my nail.
Well, the problem is they're interpreting it in the Greek.
They're interpreting it in Greek. Yeah. And so
That's the problem.
Yeah. So, but why would Yeshua ask this, repetition of, "Do you love me?" And I think, because I think that the 3 times that he's doing that is actually for a specific reason.
Because I think he denied him 3 times.
Yeah, it's going back to the 3 denials of Peter.
And he has to bring it back in.
So when we look in Matthew chapter 26, this is where we see the denial done by Peter. In Matthew 26, verse 69, says, Kepha was sitting outside in the courtyard when a servant girl came up to him. You two were there with Yeshua from Galilee, she said, but he denied it in front of everyone. I don't know what you're talking about. And he went out onto the porch, and another girl saw him and said to the people there, this is the man who was with Yeshua of Nazareth. And again, he denied it, swearing, I don't know the man. And after a little while, the bystanders approached Kepha and said, you must be one of them. Your accent gives you away. This time he began to evoke a curse on himself as he swore, I do not know the man. And he immediately, the rooster crowed. And Kepha remembered what Yeshua had said. And before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and cried bitterly. And so, this 3 times that he's asking Peter this, this is happening, what we read in John is actually happening after his crucifixion. This was, he's appearing to his Talmudim, and that's when he asked Peter that question 3 times. And that repetition isn't just being redundant. It's about covenant language and restoration. This repetition of restoring is restoring Peter's commitment back to Yeshua. Mm-hmm. When he denied him 3 times and then Yeshua was crucified and rose again, then he is actually appearing to him. He's asking them that 3 times to restore him back into the covenant. So, and if we go back to what we began with in this week's parsha, where we see the children of Israel saying 3 times that we will obey. We were going to do this. That this is about sealing their commitment to the covenant. The repetition wasn't for God's sake, it's for ours. Because you think about it, when you're doing something, if you repeat it, then it becomes a habit. Okay. So when you think about here that we repeat obedience until that obedience becomes our identity.
What I got, it's like they're making a vow to God. And it says about making a vow,
Mm-hmm.
we will,
Yeah. Well, it's sealing that you're going to be a part of that covenant.
Make a vow unless, you're
going to feel it. Yeah.
We're going to break it, in which they did. And so that's going to stick in their head. We made this vow.
Yeah. And we've done it.
We've done it 3
times. Yeah. And so too, when you repeat it, we repeat love until love becomes our foundation. We repeat truth until truth rewrites, the untruths on our hearts and lives. And so this repetition is in a way, I saw something that was saying that this repetition was like the way that the potter uses pressure on the clay. When the potter is, he's putting pressure on that clay to form it, but it wasn't, the intent is not to break that clay, that is to shape it and to form us. And so that same thing here, that repetition, just like that, the potter will repeatedly have his hands on that clay. It's not necessarily to break us, but to form us. So,
and if the potter, if he sees a flaw, it starts to wiggle a little bit, he will try to reshape it without destroying the whole thing. And that's what is.
And he can take it all the way back down to, the family. And so sometimes that's what our life is like.
We have to be reshaped, redone every day.
Right.
Okay.
So in this parsha, going back to Exodus 21, Mishpatim, Yah is showing us that spirituality is not separate from our daily life. Okay. It is not just going to a service on 2 days a week. is going to make you spiritual. It is ingrained in your daily life. How we interact with others on a daily basis, how we treat others, how we handle our property, how we care for those around us, reflects our relationship with Yah. And all of these are a part of serving Yah. And so, as we begin, I wanted to look at the title of this parsha is Mishpatim. And so when we look at the word Mishpatim, the root of that is mishpat, which is, like I said, judgments or rulings. But at the root of the word mishpat, we have the word shafat, which refers to like judging sin. And the root of that word, shafat, the very first time we see that, could you think about when the first time you think it would be that it was used? I mean, the first time I thought that it might be used would be with Adam and Eve in the garden, but it wasn't. It's actually in Genesis 16, verse 5. And this is where Sarah is talking to Abraham about Hagar. And Sarah says to Avram, "This outrage that you've done to me is your fault. True, I gave my slave girl to you to sleep with, but when she saw that she was pregnant, she began holding me in contempt. May Yah decide," or Shaphat, "between who is right, I or you." So look at what she's saying. She's saying Yah's going to judge between you and I, Abraham, not between Sarah and Hagar, but between Abraham and Sarah, who was right. Because Sarah's, upset about what was happening with Hagar, and Abraham didn't seem to step up and put a stop to the contempt that Hagar was showing to Sarah. And then Sarah replies, "Well, Yah's going to judge who's right between us." And look at what Abraham's response is in Genesis 16:6. However, Avram answered Sarah and said, "Look, she is your slave girl. Deal with her as you think fit." And then Sarah treated her so harshly that she ran away from her. And, what I find interesting is when you look at this in the Hebrew, Abraham says that Sarah is her handmaiden, but it says, "Do to her as it seems tov to you." Do to her as it seems good, okay? And it says, and Sarah rebuked her. Not, treated her harshly, she rebuked her. And it was then that Hagar runs off and encounters this Malak and is told to go back and submit. And, and this Malak tells her, Hagar, you go back and you submit yourself, humble yourself towards Sarah. And so this was Yah's ruling or judgment on the situation. That, when you look at what happened here, it was she's saying, "Yah, you're going to judge between me and Abraham because he's not saying anything about it. And this is, it's not right." And so she stood up, and then Sarah, he's like, "Okay, well, you do what's good. You do what's good." And so she rebukes her. So that rebuke was good. And Yah, Hagar goes off and she ends up confronting this angel that tells her you need to humble yourself.
So it was all on the spot. Sarah, started it with, "I can't have a child," and then,
Well, I don't see that that's her fault. I think that's a part of the culture.
Wasn't he's to put as the male stand up to all of this and say, a woman's not supposed to speak to man back then.
Right. Well, and two, I don't think Sarah was wrong for doing that. I think that was part of the culture.
And that she could understand how to have a child.
Right. And
but,
so, yeah. And so
Abraham
Right.
trusted God, so why didn't?
Yeah, so Abraham could have said it, but once he did that, then you had Hagar.
Hagar's fault, cause.
Well, Hagar
She
did
was
get it out, yeah,
pregnant,
but Hagar got an attitude.
right,
Like if you think about today, what happens? Many people come into this movement, they learn a little Hebrew, and then what do? We know better than the Jews know, who've been studying it for 3,000 years.
so,
And it's the same thing. And that's what happened with Hagar. Hagar got an attitude
yeah,
with Sarah and didn't stop. And then he's like, okay, she's like, y'all's going to judge between this. So we also see that root Shaphat coming to play in a future judgment. In Joel chapter 4, verse 12. Okay, Joel 4, verse 12. And I'm wondering if this might be a different. Yes, it is a different one. Depending on which version you are reading, it might be. I'm looking to see what verse it is in a different version. Okay, so if you're in a different Bible, it might be chapter 3, verse 12. So it just depends on your Bible that you're using. But in the complete Jewish Bible, it's chapter 4, verse 12, which says, let the nations be roused and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there I will sit to judge all of the surrounding nations. Okay, so this is talking about the future judgment of the nations. And where this happens is in the valley of Jehoshaphat. Okay, and Jehoshaphat means Yah judges. And so this is where the nations are going to be judged. Okay. And if you think about, okay, where is this valley?
Kidron.
The Kidron Valley. Yeah. So it's in Jerusalem. This judgment is going to happen right in front of the Temple Mount. Okay. And this valley today is also called the Kidron Valley. So now this Shaphat, this judging is also linked with, not only of judging between rulings, who's right and who's wrong, like in the civil matter, but it's also about judging sin, okay, and the nations being held accountable. So mishpatim, I wanted to look at this word. Mishpatim are decisions or rulings that are consistent with the other commandments, okay, or mitzvot, and the other statutes like the hukim, okay? And it sets a precedent for the future expectations of Israel. Now, the very first time we see that word mishpat or mishpatim is actually in Genesis 18. And I know I'm spending a little bit of time on just this word because I want to get this in your brain before we start getting into these. Okay, Genesis 18, verse 19. Okay, so Genesis 18, verse 19 says, for I have made myself known to him so that he will give orders to his children and to his household after him to keep the way of Yah and do what is right and just. That word just there is mishpat. Okay. So that Yah may bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. So that's the very first occurrence that we have of that word mishpat, judging. Okay. And it says that that Yah is going to do this to do what is right and just. Okay. And like I said, it's usually translated as a legal ruling, a statute, or an ordinance. And it's always tied with justice. Now, why I want you to think about this, don't think of it as commandment. Because a mishpatim is a legal ruling. So think about court cases. Okay. Now, I want to go to Numbers chapter 9. And I want to look at this. Numbers chapter 9, verse 6. because here is a prime example. Numbers 9, verse 6. But there were certain people who had become unclean because of someone's corpse. So they could not observe Pesach on that day. So they came before Moshe and Aaron that day and said to him, "We are unclean because of someone's corpse, but why must we be kept from bringing an offering to Yah at the time designated for the children of Israel?" And Moshe answered them, "Wait, so I can hear what Yah will order concerning you." And Yah said to Moshe, "Tell the people of Israel, if any of you now or in the future generations is unclean because of a corpse, or if he's on a trip abroad, nevertheless, he is to observe Pesach. He will observe it in the second month on the 14th day at dusk. They are to eat it with matzah and meor, and they are to leave none of it until morning. They are not to break any of its bones. They are to observe it according to all the regulations of Pesach. But the person who is clean and not on a trip and who fails to observe Pesach will be cut off from his people because he did nothing. He did not bring the offering for Yah at its designated time. That person will bear the consequence of his sin. And if a foreigner is staying with you and wants to observe Pesach for Yah, he is to do it according to the regulations and rules of Pesach. You are to have the same law for the foreigner as the citizen of the land." So think about this a minute. The idea of the second Pesach wasn't given on Mount Sinai. It wasn't a command at Mount Sinai. It was added after that when the people went to observe Pesach and they couldn't because they had come in contact with a corpse. And what does Moshe do? They went to Moshe and it's like, well, why? We can't observe it. And this is something that Yah commands the children of Israel to do. What are we going to do about this? And so Moshe consults Yah and receives a judgment, a mishpat, or a legal ruling on the matter. Okay, you see what I'm getting at? Okay. Now, I did see one comment because, most of us here in person, believe that the Torah scroll, the Torah was not put in the ark. It was set before the ark. Okay. And I did see a comment that said that the reason why the scroll, the sefer, was put next to the ark instead of being in that ark was because Moshe would still consult Yah on things. And if something needed to be added to it, like the second Passover, he could add to it. Okay. That was just a comment that I saw there. And so, but however, after Moshe died, not even Yahushua was allowed to add or subtract to what Moshe had written down. Okay. And okay, so let's keep going. So this is another thing to think about is that this mishpat, these judgments, these rulings are the foundation of Yah's throne. In Psalms 89, verse 15. Psalms 89, 15. Says that righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Okay, so righteousness, Tzedakah and Mishpatim are the foundation of your throne. Grace and truth attend you. So it's linking these together, that righteousness and justice go together. Okay. Jeremiah, if you want to write this verse down, also mentions about doing these mishpatim. In Jeremiah 22, I'm going to read verse 3 and 4. It says, "This is what Yah says. Do what is right and just. Rescue the wrong from the oppressors. Do nothing wrong or violent to the stranger, orphan, or widow. Don't shed innocent blood in this place. If you're careful to do this, then future kings occupying David's throne will enter these palace gates riding in chariots and on horses, he and his servants and his people." Okay. So in Jeremiah, he's even talking about do what is right and just, do righteousness and justice. Okay. Do Zedekiah and Mishpatim, these rulings. Now, coming from most of us, I think I've all come from the Christian church, we tend to not understand these things, and in our minds, we put things together when they necessarily shouldn't be. Okay. For example, in the past, I mentioned about, okay, we make the connection between Yeshua and the Passover lamb, the Passover offering. And we say, or many will say, okay, well, the Passover lamb, that lamb is for a sin offering. It is true that there is a connection, I believe, between Yeshua and the Passover lamb. But the Passover lamb is not a sin offering. But what do we say? Yeshua was the Lamb of God. He is the one who is the sin offering for the world. The Lamb of God was not a sin offering at Passover. That's not for a sin offering. You see what we're doing? We're taking two things and we're putting them together. And it's right, and this is right, but when you put them together, it's not. You see what I'm saying? And the same is happening with this portion. We do the same thing. We don't understand that there is a difference between a custom and something that is commanded, whether it's a law or a ruling. Okay. And in Hebrew, the difference between these two words, like something that is what they consider a law or a ruling, is halacha. And then a custom is a minhag. Okay. And one interesting thing is that, a lot of times, if I'm on Instagram, I do follow this girl, and she's Jewish, and she goes around and she asks other Jews, other religious Jews, questions. Is it a minhag or a halacha? And she will ask them, different things. And it's amazing that they don't know if it's literally a command or is it a custom themselves, because it's blurred the line. Things have blurred for them. For example, the wearing of a kippah during prayer, the head covering. Nowhere do we see in the Torah or that it's halacha, that it is law. Okay, it began as a custom.
Only the Zixes is what God commanded.
Yep. Yet many Jews today consider it to be halacha when it actually started as a custom. And because it actually becomes part of their rabbinic commentary. That's why, like, if you go to the Western Wall and you are a male, you can't just go up to the wall and pray. You have to have a head covering on, whether it's a baseball hat or whether they have the little paper kippahs there for you to wear. A man going to any Jewish holy site has to have his head covered, because they're going to say it is law. Okay. And where do they get this from? From a biblical standpoint, only the Kohanim that were serving in the temple were required to cover their heads. In Exodus 28 and verse 14, they wore those mitres, okay? Yet, for many centuries, it became a custom, right after the temple was destroyed, that Jewish men would wear that head covering. So they took what was something done in the temple and started applying it to themselves. And then they started saying, as a code of law, that it was forbidden for you to walk 4 cubits without your head covered. Okay. Now, think about this. These, with Moshe's time, these Mishpatim, he went to Yah. He had direct contact with Yah. Okay. After that, we don't see a lot of legal rulings take place, but we did see that Moshe instituted the 70 elders.
You know, I look at it, you got them man-made laws and laws.
Right. But how do we know some of those rulings that are not, how do I say this? How do we know that some of the rulings that we think of that are Jewish traditions are not really rulings from the Sanhedrin? Because it wasn't just Moshe talking to Yah. It said that, you're going to teach these 70 elders what the laws are, and they're going to rule between the people, just like, we didn't have the 70 elders before Abraham went, and Sarah happened here. And then she's like, okay, the only person we have to go to is Yah, and Yah is going to make a ruling against this. But when they couldn't do the when they couldn't do the Passover, they went to the rulings. And then later it ends up, it got to be too much for just Moshe to handle, that he's like, okay, we're going to have these the Sanhedrin are going to have the legal right to make these judgments about the Torah.
Who appointed Sanhedrin?
Yeah.
Because God only said the Levites, this priest, Where did the Sanhedrin and
that's what I did last week. Yeah, go back to last week's teaching with the 70, because where those 70 came from, those 70 elders that Moshe appointed. That's where it started.
Come down from them.
That's where it came up, and then when we ended up,
Sanhedrin's in there.
and then when we get to the temple period and the temple is built, you have 23 Kohanim, you have 23 Levites, and you have 23 judges of Israel.
Was it Judas? Did he go ask Sanhedrin he went to, wasn't he? About he could turn, about Yeshua?
To turn them in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Go back and watch last week's, because that's what was in last week's, that how it wasn't really the Sanhedrin that did that with Yeshua. Okay. So, but I don't want to, okay. So keep going. When we look at this, think about this, because we even see, and I want to go to the 1 Corinthians, and 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Okay, 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Okay, verse 4. Every man who prays or prophesies wearing something over his head brings a shame to his head. Now, wait a second. Jews, men, wear a kippah on their head.
They pray.
And they pray with it. Mm-hmm. And this verse says, if you do that, you're going to bring shame on your head. So does that mean that they were wrong? And Yeshua himself was a Jewish man. If he went up to, think about how is this working out? We've got to understand who Paul is addressing and why. Okay. This is in Corinthians. He's addressing the congregation at Corinth. Okay. Corinth was a city, even though it's Greek, it was a Roman city. It was originally a Greek city. They got destroyed. Rome rebuilt it, and it became an imperial city. Okay. So in Corinth, the imperial priest of Rome would always have their head covered in public when they were worshiping Caesar and the gods. Yeah. And so Paul is not addressing everybody here. He's addressing what's happening in Corinth. He's specifically addressing Jews in Corinth in relation to public worship. Now, what we've got to understand is that in first century, even though Rome controlled Judea and everything, Israel, Jews had autonomy over their own worship in the Roman Empire. That meant that they controlled what happened in their synagogues, not Rome. Rome allowed them to have their own worship in their synagogues, and they controlled what happened in their synagogues. But if they went outside of their synagogues, it was different. So when you think about what this was happening here within the synagogues, they could do as they pleased. Now, what I found is there, especially during the first century time period, right after Yeshua's death and everything, there wasn't a universal custom yet of all Jews wearing a kippah at that time. Some did, some didn't in the synagogues. Okay. And so when he's writing here in 1 Corinthians 11:4, every man who prays or prophesies wearing something over his head is bringing shame. He's saying, if you are walking out and you're doing public worship, you've got your head covered, you're looking just like those imperial priests who are worshiping the imp of Caesar and these gods. And you are not to do that in Corinth. He's not saying you can't go wear a head covering in your synagogue. Okay. And then if you look at if you keep looking right here in verse 5, he says, but every woman who prays or prophesies with her head unveiled brings shame to her head. And this is why there's a difference between a man between her and a woman who has had her head shaved. Now, does this mean that every woman who's going to pray needs to have her head covered? This is, again, where we've got to know the history. He's talking to what happened in Corinth, okay? Corinth was an imperial city. They had all of these temples. What did they have? We've talked about this before in those ancient pagan temples. Women was. The temple prostitutes, okay? And Corinth was very well known for that. There's actually a saying about not being like a Corinthian woman, because the Corinthian woman was, if you did not have your head covered, if you were a modest woman and you weren't a prostitute, then you wore you think about the flowing veils, whatever, we think about biblical times and stuff, we'll see. They wore that if they were a modest woman in Corinth. If they were not, and they were like a temple prostitute, they had their head uncovered, and everybody knew this was somebody you could go to if you wanted something.
And that lies the main problem of interpretation, especially in the Brit Hashgah. When Paul is having these sayings, he is answering a question from somebody in these towns. It's a question. And if you don't go back, if you don't understand the culture back then, don't understand what he was answering, right, then you can't get it right. And a lot of times the church fathers, when they would interpret this stuff, they would interpret it from a Western mindset instead of what was happening at the time in Corinth, just like you said. And so that's a big problem. Right.
And you think about too, this is why even with us, when we were living in Israel and it got to the point where, you're like, you need to wear a scarf, because of the fact that it's not that it's commanded or anything, but because of part of the culture there in the Middle East, if you are a woman who dresses modestly, and I did, and I wore my long skirts, and I didn't have my head covered, they thought that I was available for marriage.
And it was something that They saw that, so they went after that.
Yeah, and they would see that and they would go after that because they're thinking here is a religious woman and she's not married and she's wanting to get married.
Yeah.
And so that was part of the culture. And so it's not that, okay, here I don't wear my head cover, but that is not part of the culture in the United States. Whereas in, Middle East it is. So, okay. Yeah. Okay. So these mishpatim, that's basically, our legal rulings, that it's not a minhag or a custom. Okay. And so when we think about, what was happening, talking about with Paul, he's addressing a custom that was happening in Corinth, and he's talking to them about this, and this is how you need to act. It was, when you are there, you're not going to do the custom that they're doing. So you're going to have your head uncovered when you're in public. But we don't worship out in public. You shouldn't be going out and worshiping in the public. You need to be doing it, in the synagogue where we have closed doors and you can wear your head covering in there and you're not looking like the imperial worship.
There's the same Paul with Saul.
Yes.
And he was zealous. He was killing the Jews.
Yeah, he was killing the Jews.
Messiah.
Right.
So he was real strict.
Yes. And so when we think about too, these mishpatim are actually legal rulings, like coming down from the Sanhedrin, okay? From Moshe, from Yah, and then like the Sanhedrin rulings. Now, let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 17. Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 17. We haven't even read any of the portion yet, but this is what, I was going to, because I want you to understand the difference of these and why they're so important. Okay, Deuteronomy 17, verse 8. If a case comes before you at the city gates, which is too difficult for you to judge, concerning bloodshed, civil suit, personal injury, or any other controversial issue, you are to get up and go to the place which Yah your Elohim will choose and appear before the Kohanim, who are Levi'im, and the judge in office at that time. Seek their opinion and they will render a verdict for you. You will then act according to what they have told you there in that place which Yah will choose. You are to take care to act according to all of their instructions in accordance with the Torah they teach you. You are to carry out the judgments they render, not turning aside to the right or the left from the verdict which they declare to you. Anyone presumptuous enough not to pay attention to the Cohen appointed there to serve Yah, your Elohim, or to the judge, that person must die. Thus you will exterminate such wickedness from Israel. So look at what it's saying here, that if you come in, last week I talked about there were 3 places that you had the Sanhedrin. You had a small court at the city gates or at the temple gates. Then you had the lower Sanhedrin, the smaller Sanhedrin, right inside the courtyard of the women. And then in the Beit Abitinus, the Hall of Hewn Stone, you had the main Sanhedrin. So it was like we think about, when you have a court case, you take it to the smaller court and then you can bump it up to the larger courts. Okay. But look at what it says. You go to those. And this is why the Sanhedrin is made up of Kohanim and Levi'im and judges. Okay. In verse 9, you're going to go to Kohanim, Levi'im, and the judges. Seek their opinion and they will render a judgment for you. Okay, and then look at what it says in verse 11. In verse 12.
So the Cohen,
Mm-hmm.
the Kohanim
Mm-hmm.
are Levi'im.
Yeah, but you're also
a
Levi.
judge.
Yeah,
The judge.
no, they're not judges. Yeah, you had different. So in the Sanhedrin, because the Levi'im, you have Levi'im who are not Kohanim, because the Kohen are only from. So in the Sanhedrin, you would have 23, they always had an odd number, 23 Kohanim, so 23 that are descendants of Aaron.
Yeah.
You would have 23 Levi'im, so there were 23 that were just Levites, like, who were in charge of the temple. Okay, and then you would have 23 judges that were from all the other tribes. Okay. And then, so if it was, and just go back and listen to last week's, because that's where I go through about who rules on what, if you have a court case. But look at what it says in verse 11. In accordance with the Torah, they teach you, you are to carry out the judgments that they give, not turning to the right or to the left. Anyone presumptuous enough not to pay attention to the Cohen appointed there to serve Yah, your God, or to the judge. So if it's the judge that's making the rendering, if it's the Cohen or the Levite that's making that rendering, it says you don't listen to them or the judge, that person must die. Thus, they will exterminate such a wickedness from Israel.
Who would do the experiment?
Who would have to do that? Yeah.
Who's doing it?
And it just depends on what the kind of case it was. Because the people would have,
the people in each tribe would be doing.
Yeah, you would have to come back. You would have to, the people would have to stone them. Yeah.
You know, would the Sanhedrin be doing that?
No, I think it comes back to the people. The people would have to do it.
They pick people to do it.
So they wouldn't do it. Sanhedrin wouldn't do it at all.
No, they're making the ruling, and it to be the people. Yeah. And so in Matthew chapter 23, verse 2.
Right in God's eyes to do it.
Yeah, because they're breaking what he said. This is the order that he said. He said they have the ability, they have the authority to rule. Okay.
Well,
yeah,
but that's not in effect today.
Okay. Yep. We're going to, okay, wait a second. I'm going to talk about that because look at this 23 and 2, you know, in Matthew 23:2, it says the Torah teachers and the parashims, he said, who sit in the seat of Moshe. So whatever they tell you, take care to do it. Look at what Yeshua is saying. Do what the Torah teachers and the Pharisees say, who sit in the seat of Moses say. Whatever they tell you, whatever rulings they make, you are to do.
But here they're saying.
Yeah, he is saying do it. He's saying you do whatever those Pharisees tell you to do because they are making those judgments there.
I guess the question is, are they real Pharisees today?
Okay, so here's the question. Do we have a he's talking about the Sanhedrin.
That's the question.
When did the Sanhedrin end?
That's the question.
When the temple ended. We don't have a Sanhedrin.
Right.
So what do we have to go on now is just the rulings that existed from the Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
Now, there is a difference between a ruling and a custom. And remember I said, this is where we go back to the whole issue of the kippah. Today, the kippah has been considered a law and it's not a ruling. It was not a ruling there.
The Catholics wear a kippah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm over the head.
Ahead of the kippah. Yeah.
Same thing.
Okay.
Same thing.
But you see what I'm getting at? There's a difference between what is a legal ruling and what is a custom.
Yeah.
And where you step on the line is when you start making that custom be a law. Okay. For example, many of us observe Shabbat and light candles. Where in scripture does it say you light a candle for Shabbat?
No.
It doesn't. Okay.
But there's nothing wrong.
There's nothing wrong with that. But what happens is when you say you cannot do that unless it is it. Okay. Yeah. And there, when you think about it, this is where it comes to, was this a minhag or was it halacha? Was there a legal ruling that says you had to light the candle 18 minutes before Shabbat in order to sanctify Shabbat? You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Now, I like the idea of it, but what I'm saying is if there's not a legal ruling on it, then it comes back to it's not necessarily a law, it is a custom. Okay.
I mean, you'd have to go back and 30, 40 years of and study over and over.
Right.
What did God say to do?
Right. Well, not only that, but then what were because he left those appointed.
His time.
Yeah, he left those appointed in time to, give us those rulings. And this is why I say that, there is a fine line, because people will look and they're like, well, you're doing something that is Jewish and not necessarily, and you have to, you have to filter.
I mean, you have to have, and the Bible says it. What did it say? God told Moses, find righteous men that are truly righteous to make these rules because if you don't, if you have these men around making all these rules and regulations and they're not full of the Spirit, righteous men.
Right.
You can see all this stuff.
Right. And that was, I even pointed out in last week's teaching that, people always say, well, look, it was the Sanhedrin that killed Yeshua. They're the ones who did it. But that wasn't the legal Sanhedrin. Because when you go back through last week's teaching, and I was talking about the Sanhedrin never met on Shabbat or holidays. They never met at night. When was Yeshua tried?
No.
At night.
No.
That wasn't the Sanhedrin that did that. That was rogue people within there.
Well, Caiaphas wasn't even the true.
Right. So when you look at that, that wasn't a Sanhedrin ruling. Right. And that's why, I talked about before, Rabbi Ariel Cohen-Alero, who is an Orthodox Jew who wants to retry Yeshua. And that sounds weird, but the reason he's doing it is he said, I want to do a trial to show that what they're saying is wrong, that never, and it will be, he said, you bring it before a court today. Of course, they won't let him bring it, and he's not a believer in Yeshua. He doesn't believe that Yeshua is the Mashiach, but he just understands that was not a right
the way they did
do it. It was wrong. Yes, it was not the Sanhedrin. Yes,
not.
It's like one of those. What do you call those fake trials?
Yeah.
What did you call them, Eddie? Kangaroo, like the kangaroo courts. Yeah. Okay, I can't remember. Okay,
but still, God had it planned that way, or He wouldn't have let it happen.
Right.
I mean, Yeshua had to do it.
Right. Yeah. It was that. Yeah.
So, because a lot of times you have sin that comes into church and people things are not the way God says. So God has to kind of take a detour, and says, despite that, I have to, this is what I'm going to do. Just like naming a king.
Right.
And stuff. The Israel was sinning because God didn't want to have a king but him. But he said, okay.
Yeah, I'm going to allow it.
King,
yeah.
But you're going to have to, the consequences of what he rules, you're going to have to do it.
So, and I know you'll have to digest this a little bit to get in your brain that when you look at these mishpat, you got to think about these are legal court cases.
Yeah.
Okay. If someone today gets arrested of a crime, say murder, and they go to court and they don't have a body, they don't have a weapon, they don't have any evidence, a lot of evidence there to that. What's going to happen to that case? It's going to get thrown out. Does that mean that person is innocent? No, but there's a difference. This is it's a legal ruling. It's not saying the person's right. It is just throwing that case out. And so that is sort of what you think about with a mishpatim. It is sometimes judging between who's right or wrong, but then sometimes it is based on what facts do you have there you're bringing before them.
Sometimes in the court cases, though, they get evidence and that person is innocent and they don't find out
until later. Yeah.
100,
Yeah.
not 100, but
right. And that's why it comes back. And when you look at the scriptures, it comes back to that part of the Sanhedrin is to investigate. And if they are investigating and they don't have enough evidence, what do? It takes one person just can't come up and say that person's guilty.
they can stack the deck again.
Yeah, you could have an ex-girlfriend who is mad and says something. Okay, so it's that one person cannot come up and say that's guilty. But if you have the ex-girlfriend and the neighbor and the person down the street's like, I saw this happening and I saw him dragging a rug that was rolled up and it was really heavy and it had something in it and there was blood coming out of it in the back of his car.
Mhm.
You know, you've got multiple witnesses there, and that's where scripture says that you have to have 2 to 3 witnesses in order to
Mhm.
convict somebody of that.
Well, that's why they brought false witnesses.
Yeah.
Before even
Yeah.
he didn't even find nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
themselves, but he gave it over to them to make decisions.
Even
Right.
his wife.
Right. Okay. And think about this. Mhm.
Touch that. Don't mess with that, you know.
And think about, did Yeshua ever say, don't listen to the Sanhedrin?
No.
He had the perfect opportunity, if it was wrong, to him say, but instead he says, the Pharisees and who are sitting in the seat of Moses, which means they are judging, they are making those judgments. You listen and you do what they say.
And they're responsible then.
They are responsible, yeah.
They-
Because now if you've got a corrupt person, you've got a corrupt judge in there,
Yeah.
Yah's gonna handle that with them.
Yeah.
It's not your fault. Just like today, if you have a corrupt judge and he's sitting there, Yah's gonna deal with that person. It's, you know, so.
Well, in Yeshua's days, the judges, it failed for Barabbas,
Barabbas,
they
yeah.
were same.
Yeah, right.
So, it was no coincidence.
Yeah, all that lined up.
But still, it was all just because the people wanted
Right,
Barabbas,
Yeah.
whatever his name is, but didn't want Yeshua.
Right.
So Yeshua was blaspheming, they said.
yeah, they thought, yeah,
But he
Well, they
wasn't.
brought
Right.
false witnesses.
Yeah. yeah,
All the false witnesses, because they needed 2 or more witnesses. So
Right.
they brought them up and paid for them.
So
right.
court case,
With him was totally a farce, yeah, so.
yeah.
Okay, so looking at that word mishpatim, there's also a hidden picture there because mishpatim is spelled mem, shin, pei, tet, yud, mem. Okay, and so you've got a mem at the beginning, which means water or chaos, and you've got a shin next, which is for El Shaddai, and then you have a pei, which is mouth, and then which is also like the spoken word, and then you have a tet, which is a basket, meaning to surround, and then the yud is the hand, and then it's got a mem at the end. So when you look at the meanings of those letters of mishpatim, we've got chaos at both ends, and in the middle we've got El Shaddai's spoken words are surrounding us like a basket. Okay, so if we keep his Torah and his right rulings toward one another, then all of Israel is going to be safely surrounded by his words and in his hands. So, like I said, in the middle, chaos at both ends, but in the middle, El Shaddai's spoken words surrounding us like a basket. With this parsha too, we have 53 out of the 613 commands. That's a lot in one portion.
How many?
53 out of 613. And, 53 is linked with Yeshua and Torah, because when you look at the gematria, there's different ways to find the gematria. You can find the numerical value, but you can also find the ordinal value. And if you look at Yeshua and calculate Yeshua with the ordinal value, the yud is 10th letter, the shin is the 21st letter, and then the vav is the 6th letter, and the ayin is the 16th letter. So that's 53. And it's the same with Torah. If you look at the word Torah and you look at its ordinal value, the tav is the 22nd letter, the vav is the 6th letter, the resh is the 20th letter, and the hey is the 5th letter. So it also is 53. So with both of those, we've got this, 53 commands in here, and it's linking us with Yeshua and Torah. And Yeshua is a picture of the living Torah.
And that's just in
this one parsha. Yeah, one portion. Okay. Now, here's something else. As we go through these rulings, it's like a jumbled list, but there's something an issue I was grappling with. My understanding is, this is just a random one, but thinking about, okay, in Leviticus 18:18, it says, you are not to take a woman to be a rival with her sister and have sexual relations with her while her sister is still alive. So you're not to marry a sister and have relations with them, okay? But Jacob, yeah. This is why I said, okay, well, wait a minute. But we see in Genesis 29:16, with Jacob going to Laban, and he wants to marry Rachel, but he ends up marrying Leah. And then what does he do? He ends up marrying Rachel too.
Why does he say, and Laban says, well, in our culture, the oldest has to be married before that. Right. But that was from was it from his mother's or father's people? Well, that could be his mother's people. Yeah.
So, well, it's still,
But still he married sisters.
He still married sisters. So when we look at this, so when you think about it, did Jacob violate Torah because he married two sisters?
Well, it says God did it, but isn't it on the law?
And that's been puzzling for me because I believe, Yah walked and talked with Adam in the garden, and that there were things that he taught Adam that was passed down, I believe, through the righteous line. And we even see that Abraham in Genesis 26:5, it says, and all this because Abraham heeded what I said and did what I told him to do. He followed my mitzvot, my commandments, my regulations, and my teachings. So when we look at that in Genesis 26:5,
Abraham and Sarah were, one was something about one's mother and one's father.
Okay, but wait a minute. When you look at 26:5, we've got the commandments, the mitzvot, and then we've got the regulations, which are the hukim. Okay, and then it says my teachings there, which is actually Torah. Okay, it says Abraham followed the mitzvot, the hukim, and the Torah. Okay, and so how is it possible then that we end up having Jacob marrying these sisters? And, one thing that I've been doing lately is incorporating the ancient Near East perspective in a lot of the teachings. And through that, I see Yah is being counterculture of what was happening in the day. Okay, just like with the plagues of Egypt. They weren't just random plagues. They were targeting the specific gods of ancient Egypt. Okay. So he was actually being counterculture of what the Egyptians were doing.
Well, so like Ishmael, Esau married Ishmael's daughter, which him and Ishmael.
But it didn't matter that. It says that they can't marry sisters.
But I thought you couldn't marry them. It was certain things that it had to be down to a cousin, or something.
This is where I believe that aspect comes into play here. Okay, is because it's being counterculture. Okay, let's go to the parsha and look. Exodus 21:1, and I'm going to show you a little bit here first.
Exodus 21.
Yeah. These are the rulings you are to present to them. These are the Mishpatim. If you purchase a Hebrew slave, he has to work 6 years, but in the 7th, he is to be given his freedom without having to pay anything. If he came single, he is to leave single. If he was married when he came, his wife is to go with him when he leaves. But if his master gave him a wife and she bore him sons or daughters, then the wife and her children will belong to her master, and he will leave by himself. Nevertheless, if the slave declares, I love my master and my wife and my children, I don't want to go free, then the master is to bring him before God, and there at the door or doorpost, his master is to pierce his ear with an awl, and then the man will be his slave for life. If a man sells his daughter as a slave, she is not to go free like the men slaves. If her master married her but decides she no longer pleases him, then he is to allow her to be redeemed. He is not allowed to sell her to foreign people because he has treated her unfairly. If he has her marry his son, he is to treat her like a daughter. If he marries another wife, he is not to reduce her food, clothing, or marital rights. If he fails to provide her with these three things, she will be given her freedom without having to pay anything. Okay, so first of all, we look at these rules and rulings here, and we're like, well, this involves a slave or a servant, and that didn't really apply to us because we don't really have slaves or servants. Okay, that's what, a lot of times we think about. But we see that in ancient times here, a man might have a financial situation and he would not have enough money to care for his family or things. And so he could be sold as a servant or a slave for 6 years. And then in the 7th year, he would go free. Okay. And the only way that he wouldn't go free, if maybe he didn't have children, he wasn't married and he ends up, getting some dire straits and he sold himself into servitude. The only way he doesn't go free is if he marries and he chooses to stay with the master and the wife. Okay. And our idea of servitude and slavery is different than what servitude and slavery was in Israel. Okay. It's not the same as what we have in our mind.
If the man went by himself
Mm-hmm.
and the man that took him in,
Mm-hmm.
if he got him a wife and they had children now, and the children and the wife would belong to the man. Well, yeah, he got, but the man could still go free.
Yeah. Well, you didn't have to, he didn't have to get him a wife. He didn't.
When somebody stays like that, they still.
Right. And so when you look at this, our idea of slavery, what we think about slavery is not the way slaves were treated in Israel. So there's actually rules that you had to be kind to your servants. Yeah. Okay. Even in the Talmud actually mentions that if you had a special pillow that was your favorite special pillow, whatever, and you had a servant, a slave, instead of you sleeping on that pillow, you were obligated to give it to that servant. Mm-hmm. So, and this is, think about it. This is different than the idea that we have of slavery. Yeah. Okay. In our more recent history.
Yeah, because of the South and
Okay. So, but look at here. If it was if a woman was sold as a servant, a slave, a man could sell his daughter to be a slave or servant. And to us, this sounds horrible. But in those times, it was not. No. The father is positioning his daughter for a better life.
Yes.
Because you got to think about it. Think about it.
Yeah.
How they're treating that servant.
Yeah.
They're being cared for. They're given a home. They're given food. They're given protection. Okay. And it was for the intention of her to have a better life. And in Hebrew, the woman is not called an eved, a servant or a slave here, but amah. Okay. She was sold with the intention of getting married, that either that master is going to find her pleasing and marry her, or maybe he's got a son that is going to marry her. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it even says it. And if the intention were carried out, then what you couldn't divorce her. She was considered your wife for life then. Okay. And if, instead of becoming, the wife of her, what was it? What was I going to say? Oh, like instead of becoming married to the master there, she married the son. Then in verse 9, it says she enjoyed the rights of a daughter. So she became like a daughter to him.
Basically, all of God's commands handed down, through, they're right. But the world and the people have perverted all of it into it's
other things.
It's just gone gory.
But when you think about this, the purchaser here, he could act in two ways. He was compelled to take, one of these two courses. He could either, if he chose not to do any of this, he could have her redeemed. He could let her be redeemed, which that meant what? Think about Ruth and Boaz. It's that redeeming of her and that she was going to be married to a kinsman who could pay her debt. Okay. Or he could return her to made intact to her father without, verse 11 says, without making any demand for restitution. So if he chose not to do that, then he could let her go back to her father, and he didn't require payment from her father for doing that. So this provided protection for women during those times.
So basically, Boaz and Ruth, Boaz's brother had to be the one first, because remember
the brothers died, and so remember it was just Ruth coming back with her mother-in-law.
Right.
The brothers died, so it went to the next relative, closest.
The brother wasn't.
He was
He on the field for
the redeemed.
Right, and so he was the next in line. Well, so, but he wasn't the next. He has said, remember, he went to the other man and said, you have the right to redeem, but remember, you have to marry her.
Right.
And he's like, no, I'm not going to do this because it's going to have a financial hurry. And so then it came to Boaz. So,
Okay.
But when we think about this is protection for women. And yet I do believe there's another tie in here, because why and where does this come from? Could it be that these mishpatim came about because of something that happened prior to giving of the commandments at Mount Sinai, with what happened with, Jacob and Rachel and Leah? Because think about what happened here. Jacob basically was a Hebrew servant sold to Laban.
Yes.
Okay.
Because he said he'd serve him.
Yep. Because in Genesis 29:16, it says, now Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was good looking with beautiful features. And Yaakov had fallen in love with Rachel and said, I will work 7 years in exchange for Rachel, your daughter. And Laban answered, better that I give her to you than to someone else. Stay with me. Did he say yes or did he say no?
He didn't say the girl's name.
No, he said, he was talking about her. He says, in exchange Rachel for your daughter. And Laban said, better that I give her to you than to someone else. Stay with me. He didn't say either one. He didn't say yes and he didn't say no. He just says, stay with me. Be a servant to me.
Yeah.
Okay. And so could it be that these events led to the formation of these judgments that we see when they come out of Egypt? Okay. Because Yah saw what had happened to them throughout all the way what was right, what was wrong. And he was trying to show them the counterculture against the normal way of doing things. Because, when you start looking at the world and what was going on at that time, if you had to sell yourself into slavery, you were a slave for life. You had no way to get out of it in most of those. Like when you look at Mesopotamia and Hammurabi's code and stuff, you had no way to get out of that. Okay. And Yah is saying, no, I'm not going to do that. My way, I want it to be different. So here we see that Yaakov is, he was supposed to be a servant for Laban and is it family, right? For 7 years. So in the 7th year, he was to get his reward or basically get his freedom from Laban. But that didn't happen. He had to.
It's the same thing happened like Abraham and Sarah, and when they went in the land of Egypt, and the king or whatever he is saw his servant saw her and how beautiful was, and remember he told her that she was his sister.
Yeah, but that's something different.
But he
that has nothing to do with being a servant.
Pharaoh could have had her, but God
he showed
them from
right. But that didn't have to do with him being a servant there.
No, but I'm talking about he messed up the whole deal there by telling me that she was his sister.
Well, I mean, that's a whole different issue, but yeah, I mean, that's something different. That's not, I don't think it's not what we're talking about here though. Okay. So when we see that Yaakov is going to, be a servant for Laban for 7 years, he doesn't get his freedom. He works 7 more years and ends up with Rachel. And then he stays on and works more for Laban. And then remember when he runs away with his wife and his children, in Genesis 31:14, it says, Rachel and Leah answered him, we no longer have any inheritance from our father's possessions, and he considers us foreigners since he sold us. Moreover, he has consumed everything in exchange for us. Nevertheless, the wealth which God has taken away from our father has become ours and our children's anyway. So whatever God has told you to do, do. Then Yaakov got up, put his sons and wives on the camels and carried off their livestock along with the riches he had accumulated. The livestock in his possession he acquired in Padam Aram to go back to Yitzhak, his father, in the land of Canaan. So Laban then goes after him. And look at Laban's response. Laban says in 31:26, he says, what do you mean by deceiving me and carrying off my daughters as if they were captives in war? Now think about it a minute. If Laban is looking at this, that this man became his servant and he got married, who were the wife and the kids?
Leah, what chapter? First 20.
But who did they belong to? Jacob or Laban?
Laban, because
If you go to Exodus 21, if you have a servant and he marries, then the daughter and the kids
then he had to serve 7 more years.
Okay, but what I'm saying is they belong to Laban. Yeah. So that's why Laban says, why are you carrying off my daughters?
But didn't he serve all the time?
But wait a second, he didn't let him go. So in his eyes, and remember the culture of them was before this law was given. This law didn't exist. This law didn't come down until after Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
So when Jacob is doing that, this was before that law was given. This is why I said that I believe that these Mishpatim are looking and saying, well, I've seen what's happened throughout history to my people. And then when they came to Mount Sinai, and now I'm giving Moshe these Mishpatim, these rulings, it is in response to what's already happened to you. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You're now, instead of being able to be held as slave, he's like, I'm going to change this, and you can only hold them for 6 years. If they choose to get married during that time, knowing you are a servant, why not wait till your 6 years is up? If you love somebody, why didn't you serve your years and then marry them? Okay. And so in this parsha, like I said, Yah tells them that the servant can't take away a wife if he's married. So he's basically saying, what Jacob did, I get, but he shouldn't have taken away his wives. So I'm going to make the ruling that if he gets married while he's being a servant, that he can't take away those wives. Those belong to the servant. If he would have to choose to stay with him. So if the servant chose to marry, he would forever be a servant to that master. If he wanted to stay with the wife and the children.
Would their children's children be a servant of the master too, that was being born like that,
They would be his property, yes,
his,
yeah.
His wife and him would have children, and they would get grown, and they would have children.
Yeah, if they got married during that,
Yeah.
So this is why I said that this is like counterculture, that Yah's basically making these rulings counterculture. Now, and it seems like Yah's looking at both sides, because he saw how Laban treated Yaakov as a servant. But if he's really treating him as a servant, then the servant should have gone free. But he didn't. And so Yah's saying, my ways are going to be different. Okay. So could it be that this is the backstory to this ruling? And with that, now I want to go back to where I asked the question. Think about marrying daughters. In Leviticus 18:18, you aren't to marry two sisters. But we clearly see Yaakov marries two sisters. Could it be that Yah saw this strife, all the problems this caused? This is why now at Mount Sinai, he's saying, this is now going to be the ruling, because I saw all the problems it already caused. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That it's not that because Jacob broke Torah if all of it was given at the beginning. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
If all of it was given at the beginning, then Jacob broke Torah.
And through Jacob is the lineage of the
right.
tribe.
And then if you think about, well, if this was given as a counter to what had already happened to them, then Yah's making these rulings because of what happened.
Mm.
And then Jacob didn't break Torah.
And when you read it, you don't realize that this is happening because the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. Then. And it was a little different than when Jacob was doing it.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah.
Okay, so another layer for us to consider is, when you've got this Hebrew slave, it says he has to work 6 years, but in the seventh, he has to get his freedom. And you remember that makes back to you work 6 and then 7, you're free. You work 6 days, the 7th, you rest, you've got your free. That's, back to the keeping of Shabbat, which links there with those two, because, there's a time limit for it, for keeping. There's a time limit for keeping a servant, just like there's a time limit for working. And when we're keeping Shabbat, recognizing that we're not in control, because we are servants of Yah as the master. He's the one that's in control. Okay. And so Shabbat is a reminder that we are not the creator, and that, we're not in control. So, another thing here is to think about, why does he start off with this as being the very first Mishpatim, these judgments about being a slave? Well, where did they just come from? Egypt. And what were they in Egypt? Slaves. So, they had been slaves in Egypt, and here the very first Mishpatim judgments were about slavery. And he's like, okay, you remember you were slaves there? You remember how you were treated? Well, if you have Hebrew slaves, you're not going to treat them like that. This is how you're going to treat them. So, and I talked last year's teaching about how the word Hebrew slave is eved ivri, and that if you look in this passage, 21 verses 1-6 in the Hebrew, that there are exactly 76 words and 282 letters. And that if you look at the gematria of the word eved, it is 76, and ivri is 282. So the gematria of those two words are exactly the same number of words and letters in that passage. So, and when you take those two together, that it ends up being 358, which is the exact value of the word Mashiach. So, and you think about Mashiach, he is the servant. He is the gate. He is the one who, is going to do that. Okay. So I want to keep going on. Okay. Start Exodus 21, and I'm just going to start reading in verse 12. Okay. Whoever attacks a person and causes his death must be put to death. If it was not premeditated, but an act of God, then I will designate for you a place where he can flee. Those, cities, Levitical cities of refuge. But if someone willfully kills another after deliberately planning, you are to take him even from my altar and put him to death. There's no sanctuary if it is premeditated murder. Even if you go into a church or whatever, there's no sanctuary there. Okay. Whoever attacks his father or his mother must be put to death. Whoever kidnaps someone must be put to death, regardless of whether he has already sold him or the person is still found in his possession. Whoever curses his father or mother must be put to death. If two people fight, one hits the other one with a stone or with his fist, and the injured party does not die but is confined to his bed, then if he recovers enough to be able to walk around outside, even with a cane, the attacker will be free of liability except to compensate him for his loss of time and to take responsibility for his care and his cover is complete. So if you're in a fight and you hurt somebody, you have to care for them and you have to compensate them. If a person beats his male or female slave with a stick so severely that he dies, he is to be punished. Except if the slave lives for a day or two, he is not to be punished since the slave is his property. If people are fighting with each other and happen to hurt a pregnant woman so badly that her unborn child dies, then even if no other harm follows, he must be fined. He must pay an amount set by the woman's husband and confirmed by the judges. If any harm follows, then you are to give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and bruise for bruise. Okay, think about that for a minute. Now, did they really live by that? Do we really live by that? No. If somebody does, if that were true, then if somebody stole from you, you chopped off their hand and then, you think about
sued. Even though they
well, you think about even today, if that were true, an eye for an eye, then that means somebody who hit my car, what am I supposed to do? Turn around and hit their car?
Yeah.
Am I going to do that? No, that wasn't the literal intent of this. These are about compensation. Okay. If he knocks out his male or female slave's tooth, he must let him go free in compensation for his tooth. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox is to be stoned and his flesh not eaten, but the owner of the ox will have no further liability. However, if the ox was in the habit of goring in the past, the owner was warned but did not confine it so that it ended up killing a man or a woman, then the ox is to be stoned and the owner is to be put to death. Same thing you think about with a dog today. If you've got an animal that is known to be in the habit and you don't confine it and it ends up killing someone, then that dog is to be killed.
That's what happened to my nephew.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Franklin's dog attacked his dog in Alton's yard and killed it.
Yeah.
And he got the holder on it, and Franklin had to pay for the vet bill and all the elder.
Yeah, but what they're saying is if it's known to that they had to be killed.
That's all they're maybe give it down in my yard.
So, however, verse 30, however, a ransom may be imposed on him and the death penalty will be commuted if he pays the amount imposed. If the ox gores his son or daughter, the same rule applies. If the ox gores a male or female slave, its owner must give the master 12 ounces of silver and the ox is to be stoned to death. If someone removes the cover from a cistern or digs one and fails to cover it and the ox or a donkey falls in, the owner of the cistern must make good the loss of compensating the animal's owner, but the dead animal will be his. If one person's ox hurts another so that it dies, they're to sell the live ox and divide the revenue from the sale. They're also to divide the dead animal. But if it's known that the ox was in the habit of goring in the past, and the owner did not define it, must pay ox for that dead animal will be his. If someone steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it, he has to pay 5 oxen and for an ox. Look at this. If someone steals an ox or a sheep, he has to pay 5 oxen for 1 ox and 4 for a sheep. So if you're stealing something, you don't just pay back what you stole. You got to pay back more. Look at that. It's like with interest, yeah. So, think about those. Like I said, any of those y'all want to talk about or whatever, because it's not about revenge. It was all about compensation. We're to leave the revenge up to Yah. The vengeance is Yah's. And like I said, it's important to note, it doesn't mean that you go out, like the an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, life for life, that you go out and just kill anybody, And there were places that were set aside if it was, not premeditated murder. It was an accident. I mean, what if you're outside and you're working in your yard and you're digging and throwing stuff up or whatever, and the metal part comes off of your shovel and hits somebody in the head behind you and they die?
I've had an accident.
Okay, so
to do that,
yeah,
off the handle, but nobody was with me.
But you think about it, that would be an accident, and so you had a place to go for that. And so this was all about compensation. It was, and Yah is basically trying to show us, you not only have to think about yourself, but you're thinking about your property. If you had your property and, if you've got your property and your property has bombs underground, and some kid bounces a ball into your property and comes running through your yard, pretty much the child's going to, there's going to be a boom. So it's about protecting, you've got to protect those that might come onto your property.
Why is it in 22 and verse 1? If a thief is caught in the act of breaking in and is beaten to death, it is not murder unless it happens after sunrise, in which is a case of murder.
Yeah,
well,
because but you got to remember, those times is different. If you are living in those times and it's at night, you don't see the person that's coming in. You don't know, right? And so if you're thinking about, if it's light and you see the person coming in, you can scream. You can run, because if you screamed, it is an obligation of those who hear that cry to come and help. Yeah, but what I'm saying is,
I'm saying now, I mean, we had to.
But do we live under this law? No, we don't live under these laws. We don't have these rulings to guide our nation. We're not under a Torah observant nation right now. So
you can't shoot these people that come in your yard and do this harm to you. So
it's, we don't live under that Torah observant nation yet. Yeah.
It's cool what states you live in.
Yeah. I mean, there's,
Florida.
Yeah.
If somebody comes in your yard, you can shoot.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Yeah. But the whole point is, Yah is trying to deter us from bad behavior.
Right.
These rulings are trying to deter us from bad behavior. Okay, so looking through, I'm not going to read all this, but looking through chapter 22 and going over to chapter 23, if there's anything y'all want to talk about, but I'm skipping down to chapter 23, verse 13. Yeah. Okay. So 13, pay attention to everything I've said to you. Don't invoke the names of other gods or even let them be heard crossing your lips.
Yeah. Now does that mean if we even say their name?
Okay. Well, wait a second. If you say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you're saying, okay. So should we never say the names of those gods?
And even the Torah, when
it's got those names in there. So what are you going to do when you read them? Yeah.
What are we saying?
Well, what if you get to the Hebrew month? The Hebrew month Tammuz is named after a pagan god.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
What are you getting here? I mean, this is, God said this.
Right. Leviticus 20, verse 1, Yah says to Moshe, say to the people of Israel, if someone from the people or one of the foreigners living in Israel sacrifices one of his children to Moloch, he must be put to death. The people living in the land are to stone him to death. Well, if we're reading that verse, even Yah himself tells Moshe to say that. Well, wait a minute. Moshe just said Moloch.
Yeah.
Moshe just said Moloch. Okay. In 1 Kings 18:40, Elijah, Eliyahu said to him, seize the prophets of Baal. Well, wait a second. Eliyahu just said Baal. Okay. And so when we look at that a little closer, where it says in Exodus 23:13, it says, do not invoke the names of other gods there. It is actually Tazikru. Tazikru is from Zakaru, which is to be remembered. So you are not to cause to remembrance or do something in memory of.
Or dwell on it.
Okay. Or no, not dwell on it, but it's more like if you're doing something in honor, if you're doing something in memory of someone, you're doing it in honor of them. You're calling on that God. You're calling on that. Okay. And so he's like, don't even do that. And in Isaiah 48:1, it says, listen to this house of Yaakov, called by the name of Israel, who've come from the spring of Yehuda, who swear by the name of Yah and invoke the name of the God of Israel. It is not sincerely or justified. So when you see that word invoke there, Tazikru, it is about calling on them as in prayer, calling on them as in memory, or doing something in honor of them. So from my understanding of that, when it's talking about don't call on the names of these gods, it is about not calling on, honoring them, not calling them on them in prayer. So.
Yeah, because all through the Bible.
You couldn't even read a lot of the scriptures. You'd have to leave out verses then, so. And then it goes down to chapter 24, verse 7. I'll just look at this one. He took the book of the covenant and he read it aloud so the people could hear, and they responded, everything that Yah has spoken we will do and obey. And then Moshe took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant which Yah has made with you in accordance with all of these words. And so the children of Israel, they responded that they would obey the covenant. They did it 3 times to show their commitment that we are committed to this covenant. And Moshe sprinkles the blood on the people. And so that was to inaugurate, I can't hate that word, the covenant, to enact it, indicating that they were free from slavery. And that, to think about, this is exactly what Yeshua did. Yeshua is releasing that, like in Hebrews, it talks about that blood being releasing us from that death sentence that we have. So that he's renewing it and making it possible so that we have eternal life and that we don't have death as part of that. So, okay. So any of those that you guys want to cover in there, like I said, there's a long list, but I wanted to mostly spend most of this on the fact of what these were, that these were rulings and
not commands,
because there is a difference in those words. But just because it is a ruling, it is also to be obeyed. It is like law. It is legal, but it's not that same word as Torah. Okay. And that it is, and that some of these, I believe, were done counterculture, and that's why Yaakov wasn't really breaking Torah by marrying sisters. That it was done after the fact. These rulings came after the fact, as a response to how things were happening and how he was treated in the world. So. Y'all got anything else y'all want to share? Sorry. No. Nope, they're quiet. So,
Amen.
okay. I guess we're,
If everybody wants to get ready, we'll have the blessing of the congregation.
I'll be right back.
okay.
All right. To that, baby. Here we go. Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
I know that's probably a little different take on it, but to think about, I mean, to think about some of those, and it makes you wonder about, and like I said, I've always sort of questioned, well, how is that possible? That was Jacob breaking Torah when he is marrying sisters there? But when I really started understanding that these were legal rulings and that these were basically like done, that legal rulings can happen as things occurred. Just like the whole legal ruling about second Passover, it wasn't given at Mount Sinai. That did not occur until afterward. And so he added to, it was, Yah saying, Moshe went to Yah and made this judgment based on the Torah. This is, this is how it's going to be.
Yeah.
So.
You ready, Ken?
We're ready.
Okay. Ready.
They ready?
That's what I said.
So,
okay.
Man. Yeberekaka Yahava Virishmei Reha Yair Yahava Panava Ileka Vehuneka Yesayahava Panavileka Vayashim Leka Shalom. May Yah bless you and keep you. May Yah make his face to shine on you and show you his favor. May Yah lift up his face toward you and give you peace. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. Sar Shalom. Go in peace. Amen. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Amen. Remember next week. Hopefully everybody that can come. Debbie will let you know what time I'll come pick you up.
Okay, looking forward to it.
Looking forward to seeing everybody. Hopefully everybody that can come. Pray y'all's will. Won't be no snow or ice or nothing.
Amen.
Hopefully none of that. So love y'all. Good to see you. Good to see everybody. And you be blessed. And remember, when you love Yah first and love your neighbor yourself and foundation, Yah's going to be with you. Amen.
Amen.
He's going to stay with you and love y'all. Love y'all.
Shavuot Tov. Y'all have a great week. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.